Welcome to Collab Houston. We're a group of youth pastors located in the Houston area, and we're getting together to talk about our years of experience in youth ministry, life, and how to further God's kingdom. Our purpose is to have a dialogue about how to do ministry well in the Asian American, specifically the Chinese community. We also want to have an active dialogue from our community during our sessions, so please feel free to comment during our live stream, and we'll do our best to answer the questions as they come along. Thanks again for joining us. And now, here's Kai, Stanley, Jeremy, and Justin.
Welcome everybody to Collab Houston. We got a one-on-one special event with Pastor Jason Tarn of HEC. And so, man, this has been we're actually wanting to get you on here for a while, but I appreciate your time and ability to come here. And so, for those who don't know who you are, which I don't know why they wouldn't, why don't you introduce yourself? You know, where you're from, where you're at, what you're studying at the moment, all that type of stuff.
Yeah, well, that's great. Yeah, so I'm Jason, the English pastor over at Houston Chinese Church, born and raised here in Houston. I didn't grow up in a religious home, but I was middle school, so end of my seventh grade year, invited to church, and Houston Chinese Church was that church. That was kind of my first exposure to Christianity. And that summer, everyone's saying, hey, you should go to camp. You should go to camp. And so this thing called Discovery Camp. And so
where was it back then?
That was at Piney Woods.
Piney Woods, man.
Yeah. So in the Tabernacle over at Piney Woods. Yeah. So that's what the sessions were. And that's where I really first heard the gospel. That's where, a counselor sat me down, explained the gospel to me. My first profession of faith would have been at that D camp. And so from that point on, got plugged into the youth group over at HCC. And even though I don't have Christian parents, we lived real close to HCC, so they were willing to drop me off every Friday night, every Sunday morning. I guess in their minds, they're like, hey, better hanging out at church, making friends with church kids, right? So that was kind of me growing up through the youth group over at HEC. But, looking back, I would probably say conversion more likely took place in my college years. Now, with greater hindsight. And so I went to the University of Texas in Austin, and it was through, God's grace, and then through, just the church that I was at over there, First Evangelical Free, and then the fellowship, Chinese Bible Study, which is now Asian American
Campus Ministry.
Campus Ministries, Campus Ministries,
Yeah. But you said you went to EV Free Austin?
Yeah.
Was that David Daniels?
Yes, David Daniels was the college pastor then. Now he's over in the DFW area.
That's right.
Yeah,
Pantego.
They changed the name of I think they called themselves now Central Baptist. I could be wrong, but it was called Pantego.
David Daniels was a legend in Austin back then.
Oh, definitely, man.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So his preaching was real formative for me.
And then what was the process after college to where you're at now?
Yeah, so that was my first sense of any kind of aspiration towards full-time vocational ministry was starting the senior year of college. Missions was kind of where I was more leaning at that point. That was a Urbana year, so I went to Urbana, and
I remember that we rode the same van together from HEC.
Yeah, it was the one that was still in Urbana, right?
Yeah, it was like freezing that year.
Yes, I was not dressed for that.
Oh my gosh!
that was my first experience of like Chicago or just, Illinois winter. That was crazy.
Nuts.
Yeah, but that was Ken Fong was the Bible expositor.
That's right.
There too. So that Urbana, and then also a prior summer mission trip really kind of sparked that fire and that aspiration to do vocational ministry. But it was kind of tough with my parents kind of wrapping their heads around the idea of me graduating out of college after they helped put me through college, and then I go asking other people for money.
And that wasn't your major though, right?
Oh yeah, no, I was a business major. I
Okay.
was, I mean, so I hadn't really prior to that no thoughts of Christian ministry, and so missions with the whole idea of support raising was
Mm.
harder for them to reconcile with the whole pursuit of higher education and go get
Yeah,
yourself a
yeah.
job. So I ended up trying to get a job at using my degree, but through a turn of events, the God's providence really. I saw his hand working. I ended up, my first job out of college was actually at Houston Chinese Church.
Oh,
It was the youth internship. So
okay.
I did
Okay.
a 1 year youth internship, and that was my first experience of like youth ministry.
Wait, like straight out of
And
college?
yeah, so I was gonna go into Price Waterhouse Coopers. I was gonna go and start a consulting position there. But then so I graduated in 2001. So
Okay.
that's when in the Houston area, Enron kind of the scandal and
Yeah.
that company fell, and there was just kind of a downturn in the economy, like the dot-com bubble bursting and everything. So
Yeah.
they ended up freezing the hirings, the new hires, and pushing back the start date an
Mm.
entire year. So I had a year to do something, and God provided the opportunity for me to do a 1 year internship
A youth
at HCC.
internship.
Yeah, and I mean that really solidified it for me. So that 1 year really kind of sharpened the sense of direction and going from just thinking of just Christian ministry, thinking missions, but then through my experience of working with the youth, teaching the word, it's getting the affirmation from the youth, from their parents, from my fellow colleagues on staff. I was being affirmed to continue pursuing this, and I had the internal desire and sense of calling as well. And so, I at the end of that year, I was like, you know what, I think I want to pursue youth ministry, pastoral ministry, and so I turned down
Was it
the
pastoral ministry or is it youth ministry in specifically?
yeah, well, I guess pastoral ministry, which I would still include youth
Right.
ministry in terms of the shepherding care of a
Right.
flock. So
Okay.
I realized, like, and I usually tell people this, like, one thing that really got me realizing I think I'm more suited for working in the local church is because if you were to like say, hey, Jason, look, you've got time, limited
Speaking.
time, and you have like an opportunity to invest in 5 guys. These 5 guys over here are non-believers, don't know much about the faith, maybe a little skeptical of it, and you can be able to kind of meet with them. And then you have these other 5 guys over here who are either new believers or they've been walking with the Lord, but they're just hungry to grow,
Hmm.
and they're looking for someone to really help disciple them,
Right.
mature them up in the faith. Both types of ministries are equally
Important.
valuable,
Yeah, absolutely.
important. I sense an important calling that I should be pursuing to seek to have those type of relationships in my life. But if you gave me a choice right now, like which one would I personally want to
Yeah.
invest my time and energies into, I would always gravitate towards those 5 guys that are believing, but they're looking to be kind of built up in their understanding of the word, their theology, building up
Yeah.
their kind of gifts to serve the Lord. So, I mean, I don't know. I realize that if I'm, if God really is calling me to be a missionary, if I'm really cut out for that, then I think I'll be gravitating towards
Yeah.
wanting to always be around those non-believers more often. It's
That's
not that
huge.
I don't have a heart at all for
Right.
evangelism, but I know that's actually harder for me, and
Right.
I would gravitate towards discipling young believers. That's a sweet spot for me. Evangelism is something that I have to keep pushing myself towards.
Man,
So I realize I think local church ministry is probably better suited.
and I think that's huge. I mean, I mean, we'll have to get back to that, circle back to that, because I mean, I think
Yeah,
especially for young pastors or even people who are thinking about ministry, I mean, it's like they got to do everything. But
yeah,
I mean, I think we're called to do evangelism, we're called to shepherd, but I think there are ways
yeah.
where you can lead into one or the other.
Yeah, and just knowing how you're wired, knowing how God has gifted you,
Yeah.
and yeah. So I was just learning more about myself and the way God has shaped me to be able to serve, and yeah. So that was that first year of youth ministry that kind of set me on that track, and then I did youth ministry for 4 years in total. And that's when I started pursuing seminary education. So my first, so 4 years, and then got married to my wife, Teresa. And then we moved up to Vancouver, British Columbia to go to Regent College.
Okay.
And that's where I did my MDiv there.
Wait, so after your first year internship, you did another 3-4 years?
3 years.
3 years?
No, so 4 years in total. So
Okay.
1 year of internship and 3 years as the youth director.
Okay.
Over at HCC.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was a fun time because over at Ben Pun was over at your church.
Ben Pun, yeah.
And then John Lynn was over at Fort Bend Community Church, and Danny Yang was over at West Houston.
Man, y'all need, the four of y'all need to make a podcast, and then y'all need to see what's going on.
That was a fun time. We're starting with them because we did camp together. You know, we did sometimes some winter retreats and things like that. So that crew of youth guys at the time, it was a fun time to be in ministry. So yeah.
And then you said you after you got married, you guys went to Vancouver.
Yeah.
So tell us about your seminary experience doing over there.
Yeah. You know, so the reason I even thought about Regent College was I was really into J.I. Packer, and so you know I still am, but I read a lot of him back towards the tail end of college and into those 4 years of youth ministry. I kept looking on the back of the book and it said chair of Sangwoo something, professor of theology at Regent College. I'm like, hey, all right. So that must be a pretty good school. So
for people who have no clue who J.I. Packer is, you get in like one or two sentences. Who's J.I. Packer?
He is an Anglican theologian. Most of his, I guess, teaching experience was over at Regent College. Yeah. And he wrote a lot of books. He's probably known as, in the 20th century, probably one of the
guys.
Yeah, the best known evangelical thinker, writer. His most famous book is Knowing God. I'm actually in my church. I'm leading a book club right now, and we're reading Knowing God together, and that's been a great experience.
That should be required reading for anybody.
Yeah. So Packer was he actually just passed away a month ago or 2 months ago. And so he was retired by the time I got there, but he was still offering classes. Yeah. And so any chance I could get, I would try to take some courses from him.
Did you sit under him?
Yeah. So I took this one course which was like a seminar class. It was a smaller class on the atonement. Oh, so it was great.
That's the book.
Yeah. And then being able to just kind of interact with him. So that was cool. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it was a good experience. Like if you're familiar with Regent as a school and their kind of overall philosophy, I mean, they're like Big Tent evangelical. Mm-hmm. And so though I'm coming from like Houston, non-denominational Chinese church, right?
Yeah.
I don't have that much of a like denominational confessional tradition, but overall it's just kind of more Bible church, kind of background, more conservative background. So, and at that time when I was in college and youth ministry, I was also developing my own like Reformed convictions. And so I think by that time going over there, fairly settled in certain kind of convictions of how I'm kind of understanding the Word of God and some of the larger key doctrines. So I think it was good because my experience there, it was challenging, making sure that, do I really believe what I believe? Because I'm not just going to a place where they're just, spoon feeding me the same thing that I already think and believe. They were challenging me quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I got to interact with other Christians who they're coming from denominational backgrounds, theological backgrounds that I probably wouldn't be crossing paths with. Because even to this day, I don't cross paths with people from Pentecostal Assemblies of God background. I had a good friend who was a Mennonite. I didn't know too many Mennonites.
Right, not down here.
Yeah, growing up in Texas, right? Even though the youth pastor that I grew up with at HCC, he has a Mennonite background. But just in terms of someone really that was not just culturally Mennonite, but theologically rooted in that tradition. So, and just befriending him. So I think that was a good experience for me of being stretched in that way. But it was my experience at the local church over there that I really found refuge, where I did find like-minded believers and a pastor who mentored me. And that was where it was very formative, just learning under him and then serving under him during my internship there. And then also after I graduated, I was his associate pastor for 3 years before we eventually moved back to Houston.
And you moved back to Houston back in
2011. Okay. Yeah.
That's when you took the position of English pastor.
Yeah. So, well, it was an English minister position, and then eventually I got ordained and became English pastor. And so that's also when our daughter was born. So our daughter, she's 9 now. So when she was born, that kind of was the impetus for us to start thinking about looking for opportunities back in Houston.
Yeah.
And then, God's providence said there was an opportunity at HEC. It was an interesting kind of role because one of the main responsibilities was to preach in the English service. And so I didn't think that I would have that opportunity so soon out of seminary. Yeah. And so the fact that it was the kind of role that and the responsibilities that I was aspiring towards and preparing myself for. And then it was at my own home church, where I already had a great relationship with Pastor Fred over there and other colleagues that were still on staff. And so I thought, man, this is God really opening a huge door for me. And so, yeah, I've been there for 9 going on 10 years.
Man, that's awesome. There. That's awesome. I mean, I think again, if most people know who you are if they live in Houston and the Asian community, but it's pretty awesome. But then you're still in school right now, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. So I'm doing I'm following your steps now.
Yeah, right.
Doing a doctorate of ministry over at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary.
The Southern
Baptist Theological Seminary, and that's going to be focusing on expository preaching. So yeah.
Yeah. Are you close or still working on the?
Still working on it, and right now during this pandemic time, it's been hard to really build that back into my schedule.
Yeah.
But so I'm on the project phase of it right now,
that's
and
awesome.
that's something that I'm Lord willing, if I can really put some attention into it, then I'm aiming for next summer to be.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So.
And to defend and everything.
Yeah, Lord willing.
I heard virtual defenses were fairly easy this year for.
Oh, nice. Yeah, because the professors are like they're tired of Zoom. Yeah, they just want to get off.
Just like, maybe a small incentive to
Yeah, to hurry up and finish it while the pandemic's still going on. Yeah.
Seriously. But
so hey, are you still doing? You're doing one right now. Or you finished the second one.
I'm done with I'm done with the first one. I'm doing a doctorate of education from Midwestern.
Oh, the Demon Ed. Okay.
No, they actually started off as the Edmin, right? The Doctor of Educational, Doctor of Educational Ministry, and then I think they switched it. They allowed us to change to the Doctor of Education. So now, it's more recognizable to secular sources and stuff like that. So,
nice.
But it also makes us take like statistics and all these other courses that I'm like, oh my god.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I'm just looking forward to finishing this, and I think I'll be good.
That's what you say, and you're gonna go back for another one. So hey, I wanted to ask you some questions since your background's in youth ministry, and I mean you're working in this local church. So from your position, right? Like where and again, I'm coming from a youth ministry side. What's your take right now just for youth today? You said your daughter's 9. That means she's coming to the youth soon, not just the youth group, but like teenage years, middle school.
Don't remind me. That's crazy.
Right. Yeah. I got like 4 or 5 years for my girls to get there, but I mean, she's almost there. So, I mean, what from you as a father, looking at teenage worlds, what's swirling in your mind? First and foremost, as a dad in this culture.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if among youth pastors, are you guys talking about that Netflix documentary, Social Dilemma?
I watched it last night. I mean, I had to.
Yeah.
My professor recommended it. I watched that. I thought you were talking about Cuties first, and then I was.
Oh no,
I haven't watched that one.
I haven't watched that either. I don't plan on watching that one, but Social Dilemma,
Social Dilemma. That was.
that was wow. I was really intrigued by that
Mhm.
because it's not like, I mean, obviously it's a critical analysis of social media and just, our smartphones and how it's really, we're not using it so much as it's using
And
us.
it kept on saying, "We're the
And
product. We're the product." Right.
yeah, I just thought that was such a important way of framing it, is that normally we would be the customers
Hmm.
of technology, but in the case of social media, the customers are the advertisers and we're the product,
Yeah.
and they're selling us. And just, it was convicting for myself, just thinking about my own habits,
Hmm.
and how, yeah, it is addictive, and how the way that those guys were describing their own experience of how addicted they were to certain platforms, I'm like, wow, okay, yeah, that's that rings true for me as well. So I think it was very helpful to understand at least what's happening, not being blind or ignorant to the very strategy that they're using. So I thought it was interesting that these are all like high executives of
Yeah.
these very
Yeah.
tech
That's
companies.
right.
And so that was something where, man, I'm thinking, and actually, this is, where I need to learn from you guys, because you guys are more aware of what, these preteens and teens today, and their usage of social media. So this is like a new world for me, as like a dad who still has, a daughter, not a preteen yet, but yes, definitely getting there. And so, but that was something I was thinking, man, I could totally see how that is kind of shaping their worldview
Yeah.
in a way that is a unique experience that we didn't grow up with.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad I didn't grow up with like social media, because I'm just thinking of all the embarrassing things that I, did growing up, and the way I dressed, growing up in middle school or high school. I mean, I'm so glad that those photos are far and few to come by, and probably lost in someone's, dresser drawer,
You can't say
as
that
opposed
now,
to like
man. This is
everywhere.
everyone's gonna start
No,
posting this on
no,
the.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, okay, please. Yeah, but that's where I just can't imagine
Yeah.
having no privacy, in that sense of like your life is just archived so accessibly, to where it's all of the highs and the lows,
Yeah.
kind of just for the world to see and to judge. And yeah, so I think that's definitely one thing that I'm trying to learn more about, in terms of how technology and social media is impacting the thinking and the emotional and mental health of
Yeah.
of our young people.
I mean, when I was watching this last night with my wife, I think for us as youth pastors, I think we knew, right, like we kind of know the soft stats. We do realize there's links to mental health and depression, anxiety. We always said, hey, your phone can't be another idol, and it does affect. But I think hearing it now from top level sources from within the industry, and
Yeah,
watching them kind of expose what not just, and again, I think the message from the church has always been, well, don't be addicted to social media, don't be addicted, and they gave the reasons why, right? And it
yeah,
really does align spirit, like there's some real clear spiritual connections to this, and it's affecting how I feel, my identity, my self-worth. And really, I mean, I wish they would have taken the turn to say the relief is the gospel, because
yeah,
it breaks you out of the cycle. I mean, it
yeah,
restores and redeems humanity that has been stolen from you. And it's not something that's the tech companies can do, but it's something that you can't break this addiction outside of serious detox. But that has to come from a realization that you are addicted. You are serving a God in a sense, right? They didn't say that, but I was like, hey,
yeah,
you can
yeah.
preach this. I mean, to
Yeah,
some extent.
exactly. And gods that always fail you, gods that are that never
Yeah.
satisfy. And
Yeah.
I don't think any teen would ever I mean, yeah, just that if they're honest with themselves, they would say, yeah, this is never enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is no amount of likes or comments that is ever really going to satisfy, because they're always going to be desirous for more and more affirmation,
Yeah.
more. Yeah, so I think that's just where, yeah, it is a great platform to show the futility of chasing these
Mhm.
idols.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess, yeah, obviously in that documentary, they're not going to talk about the solution, but I think youth pastors have a great opportunity for that.
Yeah, and man, I was, how many of our, not just our youth need to hear this, but our youth leaders, our college
Yeah,
students, our parents, right? Especially
pastors.
our pastors.
Yeah,
But I mean,
yeah,
but now with Gen Z teens, right? I mean, you're talking about millennial parents now, right? You got a lot of
yeah,
millennials who are now parenting, and they grew up with social media, and so it's almost now, like you said, it's a whole different ball game in teenage world, because it's going so fast and there's so much exponential change that
yeah,
never have we experienced that prior to. Again, they said this in the documentary, when social media jumped on board, the rates of suicide and depression and all
yeah,
this
and
stuff
depression.
skyrocketed.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it's crazy. So what so as a father, you'd say nervous,
yeah.
excited
I
about these
mean,
years? I mean, like,
oh
how
yeah. I mean, these years of parenting especially are great because I'm able to have some pretty significant conversations with my daughter, and I think it had to start young. It had to start when she was younger and being, engaging her. One thing that we have a shared love for is books.
okay.
And that's something that, I mean, I could just be her wired that way. But at the same time, like, can't tell you how many hours of reading I've done to her
Okay.
since she was just a little baby. And I'm just like reading to her until eventually she got to the point she can read as well. But then I didn't never stop reading to her. I just, so every night, it's either her mom or myself reading significant portions of books to her, and good books, because, yeah, I think that's just something where I just want to keep engaging good books with her, having dialogue about that, and just building into her a love for books and a love for reading. And so I think it also helps too, because I feel like it's helped her to listen as well
Mm,
to teachers,
mm.
whether at school, whether at church, and even to preaching. So she comes to the English service and she hears me preach. She hears the other preachers in the English service, and is she getting all of it? Is she jotting
Right.
down like robust notes? No, she's not doing that. But she is listening, and I can talk to her about the sermon even afterwards and be able to bits and pieces of it. So I know she's actually listening because she's been trained for all these years prior to listen well. So I mean, she's actually far better than me at being able to listen to like an audio book
Right.
and to comprehend what she heard, because she's just been trained up to do that. Versus for myself, I got to really pay attention,
Yeah.
and so that's one thing that I've been enjoying about parenting, and hopefully there's gonna be some good fruit out of that as she continues to grow up into the teen years.
I mean, I'm trying to take notes right now, and so my first practical thing, I mean, because I think that's so crucial, right? Especially with a teenage world that is very hard to pay attention, right? I mean, you got
Yeah,
middle schoolers with very small attention spans. You got social media. You got video games that constantly kind of drive
yeah.
the actions and stuff. So, I mean, I think that's huge. What were some key books, or was it just books that you just had on the shelf at certain ages? Because I want to know for myself, like, what are books that
Yeah.
you read them early, and then how about like recent?
Yeah. So I'd say one of the earlier um, books that were more like, more chapter books would probably just be the Chronicles of
Okay,
Narnia.
Narnia.
I think that was the first one in terms of, prior to that, it was just simply, little picture books with words and things like that. But the first like chapter book that kind of built up an overall narrative would probably Narnia. Yeah,
Okay,
for sure.
and you
And I
went through
think
the whole
that was,
series.
yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Just went through the
Okay.
whole series. I'd recommend obviously starting with Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. I wouldn't start actually with Magician's Nephew.
Yeah.
I think that one, since it actually was even written later, so the publication history of it's a later book, and I think it's actually easier to understand that one if you had a concept of Narnia to
Right.
begin with. So
Right.
yeah, I'd go Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and then I'd yeah, and then kind of Magician Nephew could even be at the end, really, and
Yeah.
it would be okay. But yeah, so that was the first one I would say. we actually read through a children's like an abridged version of Pilgrim's Progress.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so
Okay.
not like the
The
full
actual,
on, yeah,
yeah,
unabridged,
unabridged.
no, totally abridged version of that. But that was the probably the second thing.
That's a good one. I
And
mean, it's
yeah,
told very well, like like a story. I mean, that's the whole
oh,
point.
definitely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's like it's that one's obviously even easier than Narnia to make the connections
Mm,
to biblical truths.
yeah.
And then it was after that we started with Lord of the Rings.
Oh
And
wow.
so that took a while, obviously,
You read
going
the
through
whole
all of that.
you read the whole
Yeah.
trilogy
We
of Lord
read
of the Rings?
through the whole
Ooh.
trilogy. Actually, you know what? I would have started with The Hobbit if I
Oh
could do it
wow.
over again. So The Hobbit probably would have been better to start with first. But we just started with the Lord of the Rings, read through that, and then we did The Hobbit, and then the Silmarillion, which is a little harder to read because it doesn't it's not all as connected as the other stories. But yeah, I mean those have been some of the big ones that I think for it's just my own like
Sure.
what I love, but I'm trying to share that love with her as well. And so yeah,
How
those are
long
some of her favorite
how long
books.
I mean, was this at night? How, like, did you spend like
Yeah.
5 hours
This is
reading?
no, yeah. So this is slow going. I mean, this took years, right? So
Okay.
this is slow going, like maybe a chapter a night.
Okay.
And sometimes for Lord of the Rings, like you can't even get through a chapter because it's so dense,
Yeah,
describing a tree for like 3 pages,
this is true.
Yeah, so it was total slow pace, and I'm not putting her to bed every night, and so my wife is actually has a whole nother thing
Oh,
that she does with her of other books, like they read through all of the Little House on the Prairie
okay.
series.
Okay.
They're still kind of going through the Anna Green Gable series of books,
Nice.
things like that. So she has her own thing with her when she puts her down, and then when it's my time to do bedtime, I've got
And,
my own
and
books.
and you say you
You
still
know,
do this like currently?
yeah,
Oh wow.
even to this day, yeah,
And
yeah,
I wonder, like you said, right? It's not just reading and developing this bond with your child and getting her to
yeah,
love books and reading, but this is also it's going to pay off when it is about listening and sitting still and not having
yeah,
to fidget with other things. I think that's going to be crucial.
yeah. And to be able just to listen to words being spoken and to build that imagination. So I mean, again, and you could probably see where I'm going with this, in the long game is I want her to be a faithful worshiper in the
Yeah,
pews,
yeah,
being able to sit under biblical preaching and to be able to really receive it, to hear it, and to engage. Now, obviously, she needs the Spirit of God to enable her and empower her. But I think what I can do right now is to build up those natural skills of being able to build up her reading comprehension, and not only just reading comprehension of what she's reading, but her auditory
right.
reading however that's called.
And,
Yeah, so
and, and
that's something that I've actually been mindful. Like I really want to make sure that she can handle listening for long chunks of time to someone just talking to her.
So, like, and I want to pause on this one because I think it's crucial. So, I mean, as the main preacher and the English pastor right now, I mean, your responsibility does roll down to
Yeah,
students, right? I mean, they're
yeah,
sitting in your pews. I think the question that a lot of the youth pastors have nowadays is, should youth be in a separate youth worship where it's more
yeah,
contextualized, or do you believe it's more? And I guess you and I are going to probably tip our hat on to expose our hand on this one, but
yeah,
should
yeah,
should it be more kind of like integrated with families and all this other stuff? Like what's your advice to
yeah. Thought
churches
process.
and also
Yeah,
youth pastors on this one?
yeah. And so for myself, even when I was doing youth ministry, I did help at HCC develop a youth service. And that was, a unique situation for us because of the fact, well, it still is a challenge today, is that because at our Chinese church, the English service goes first.
Yeah.
So the two main congregations, the two larger congregations would be English and Mandarin,
Right.
and most of the families have most of the youth are from the immigrant Mandarin side.
Okay.
So because the English service goes first and the Mandarin goes second, we do have teens in the youth service. I mean, sorry, teens in the English service because their parents could be from the English side, or their parents might be either serving, teaching Sunday school in the first hour, or they're just really dedicated to come to Sunday school. But the lion's share of the Mandarin congregation and the families will show up at the second hour for their service.
Right.
And so that means for most teens, when I was growing up, when I was doing youth ministry, and even to this day at our church, a lot of the teens, when they show up at church, English service is already finished.
Yeah.
And they're going straight to
Sunday
their,
school.
they might have a time of singing some praise songs, some announcements and things like that, but then they're going to go off into their Sunday school classes or D groups. And so back when I was in youth ministry, one of the things I really wanted to expose them more to was a corporate worship experience where they're sitting under the preaching of God's word, which they weren't really exposed to. So that's why we did a youth service at the second hour, because that's when the most of the youth were there.
Yeah.
If I did it during the first hour, it wouldn't really be conducive. I think that helped to one degree, but it also perpetuated, I think, a problem that I see now. And I really appreciated David Carter when he was at HCC after I was already gone in Vancouver. And one of the things the changes that he made, because he realized, it's good that they're getting more of a corporate worship experience, but it's keeping them from really engaging with the larger congregation. And so he actually brought the youth. He basically limited that youth service to just once a month as opposed to a weekly thing, and then really encouraged them to start coming to the English service. And I thought it was great how he even challenged immigrant parents to come to, instead of going to your Sunday school class, sit in English service with your kid so that you can be able to experience what they're experiencing in corporate worship, and then, Lord willing, even be able to engage on what God was teaching you guys through the preaching of the word. So I thought that was great. I mean, some parents took them up on that, and I really have a lot of respect for those parents who are willing to do that, and hopefully we was able to really model something healthy in the home. But that's still one of the challenges for us, just because of the timing of things, of the way we time our services. So I would, yes, I mean, if you were to ask me now what I think would be the healthier thing to do, I would encourage youth pastors to find some way to design their youth ministry so that the bulk of their youth, they're there on a Sunday morning, can be engaged in a corporate worship setting that ideally is among adults. So it's not just among their own peers. And I think that's, because if we really want them to own their faith and to be able to graduate from high school and on their own initiative, go find a church and to become an active member and participant of, unless you just happen to go to one of those universities that has like a super strong, vibrant, robust college ministry, and a church that has a really, great college ministry, they're going to be probably you'll find a church that has a worship service where they're going to be singing songs that seem really old, and the preaching is no longer geared towards them. All the illustrations and all the applications aren't, tailored towards them. And they're going to start thinking, man, this is boring. It's so not relevant to me, because we've been training them for all those years through children's ministry and youth ministry. That's what church is all about. It's all about tailoring ministry and teaching just for you, which there is a value to that. Don't get me wrong, but in a corporate worship setting, I think we need to build into them early on that, sometimes church is boring. It may not, the message may not have been like or
it's difficult or hard.
Hard to understand or something like that. And that's where I hope we can kind of build up some of those expectations and habits early on, so that when making their own choices after high school, that they're not having such a high bar where they're expecting a very tailor-made experience for them, and that they're actually more accustomed to being and worshiping with people that are of various life stages, not just their peers, but being able to talk to an adult. I think that's just such a huge achievement of of adolescence, of being able to grow up to be like a senior in high school and to be able to carry on an actual
Right.
conversation with an adult. If
Right.
you can do that, man, that's a huge win.
It is. It
Like
is.
that,
Which,
that those parents, that youth pastor, man, you've helped develop that kid pretty well, you know.
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, like, it's it's funny and sad at the same time, right? I mean, we're just going like, and we can't blame it all on social media.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the culture. This is kind of where we're at. This is, I mean, and for a lot of it, we did this to ourselves, in a big sense, But I think what you said was huge. It's still the whole, we're trying to train them to be lifelong disciples, not just
Mm,
make it out of certain ministries, right? And I think the challenge to a lot of youth pastors is, like the bar can't be so low that it's all about attendance, right? It has to be
mm.
more than that. And so good ecclesiology starts with good discipleship, early on. So before we move on to the next section, I just want to ask,
Yeah.
from your perspective, what's some advice that you would give youth pastors nowadays, especially now that you've been doing youth ministry for a little bit, and now you're
Yeah.
seeing this from more of a holistic, seeing the English side. I see parents, I see all different ages. What are some of your big advices for youth pastors
Yeah,
nowadays?
no, I think one thing I would really encourage them is to resist the temptation to settle for programmatic, entertainment-based youth ministry, which is, you know, what you're going to be most often exposed to. You go to big conferences where a lot of it's still, I mean, again, I've been out of it long enough that I don't know exactly how youth conferences kind of run nowadays, but growing up and when I was earlier in youth ministry, like the books and the conferences and just what I'm being exposed to of what these successful churches are doing would be more from an attractional model mindset, really just trying to provide these kinds of experiences for the youth that are going to bring them in, and then once you bring them in, keep them entertained, and then hopefully you're able to preach the gospel to them, to see conversions, to disciple them. But it is kind of tempting to want to fall into that kind of philosophy of just, yeah, bigger the better, the more entertaining. And I think it's just the whole principle that we need to realize is what it's been said quite often that what you win them with is what you win them to.
Yeah.
And if you win these kids with games and humor, if that's your strategy of having a really fun and funny kind of activity, and your teaching is so humorous that that's really what keeps these kids to keep coming back, then don't be surprised if their faith ends up being very lighthearted and rather superficial and unable to really sustain persevering faith in the face of crises
Yeah.
and trials that they're inevitably going to face down the road, if not in their teen years, but for sure in their post high school, college, young adult lifehood, that they need a robust faith.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, again, so that principle of what you win them with, you win them to. It might be great to draw a crowd, but are you really preparing them well to keep walking even after they've kind of graduated out of the youth group?
So what do you do with the response of going, hey, I'm like, hey, I understand that, but again, I'm working with teenagers here. As I want to get them in so that I can get them at least to stage one. Like, how do they deal with that balance of like, I know it shouldn't be attractional, but I am working with
Yeah.
teenagers. Like, where's that balance?
Yeah, and I mean, that's where that's on the real practical side of it today, that I don't really know if I would be as equipped, because I don't know youth culture as well as you guys on the front lines would. But I think that's where and man, it's really, you've been a great example for me, and you've modeled this well. I've seen the product of your youth ministry, because a lot of your youth are now graduated from high school, college, they're young adults, they're married now, and some of them are at my church, and I can see the way that you early on in youth ministry built into them, you catechized them, you taught them theology, not thinking that that was too over the head for them, but realizing that actually what they're learning at school is quite complex,
Way harder.
stuff,
Way harder.
and sometimes, way harder. And we are just thinking that they can't handle it when actually they can. And so I would, I really commend what you have been doing all these years, and really just challenging youth pastors to don't underestimate what your youth can handle. And you know what, that's where, yes, it might feel like, well, how am I going to reach these very unchurched youth? If I put on a Friday night activity that is heavy in Bible study or heavy in theological training, well, maybe that particular type of Friday night activity, maybe it's about reorienting what is the purpose of that.
Right.
And maybe it's not about using that Friday night to be the real attractional kind of event, but using that to really build up the faith and the discipleship of these youth. So you're really just targeting the kids that are in your church. Now, Lord willing, there are going to be a few, kids that maybe their parents don't go to church and they're really getting plugged in, but you're training them up. And so it's not so much as that's the attractional, bring all the non-Christians there at the time, but this is training ground.
It is.
And that Friday night is training ground to send them out to their schools.
Right.
So the real evangelistic activity may not happen on campus,
church, right,
at church on a Friday night, but it's actually going to be happening in smaller conversations and activities that your youth are initiating as they're being built up on Friday night. So I think that's where it's about changing your expectations of what some of those formal at church kind of activities are meant to accomplish.
And I think that's a massive paradigm shift in youth ministry.
Yeah.
And I mean, I totally agree with you. I think it's, are we supposed to be equipping the saints and sending them out, or are we supposed to kind of just attract everybody, right, and just be kind of this like circus type of thing? And I think it's almost the philosophy of what the church, right? How do you define what church is supposed to be, and then again, what's our role as pastors? I think you hit it, man. And I would say, do you think that way of thinking is difficult to propose in an Asian American church? Is it getting easier? Is it getting harder? Because again, we're not just working with youth ministry, we're talking about culture too.
Yeah. Now, from my experience working with Chinese side ministry and a lot of the parents who are on the Chinese side, I don't think you're going to get much pushback from them if you orient the Friday night event to being more about training up their youth, their kids. I don't think they're going to get, instead of it being really attractional and bringing in a lot of kids from the schools who are non-Christians, actually, you might actually get some pushback if you bring in a lot of kids who don't look and who don't act exactly like their kids.
Which is a whole other issue.
That's another. So I don't think you're going to get much pushback from them. The pushback is probably if they get complaints from their own kids that youth group is boring, that Friday night Bible study is boring, then that's where the pushback comes. And that's probably going to come from families, parents who may not be as, they're still they're still growing in their faith. Depending on when they were converted, they might still be newer believers. And so their understanding of what is the purpose of the church and the youth ministry might still be more seeing it as, this is us outsourcing, the faith formation to you guys, the professionals, the youth pastors, the English side. So I think that's where you might get more of a pushback there, that there are still going to be a lot of parents who really don't see themselves as responsible for the faith formation of their kids. They're going to expect that to be handled by the youth ministry and the youth pastor and leaders. So if their kid in any way complains that it's too boring, all we talk about is the Bible, or we're just talking about theology, then they're probably going to be pushing for something more engaging, and something that so that it doesn't require them dragging their kid to church. I think
So
that's usually where you get the trouble with Chinese side parents is because they're having such a struggle bringing their kid to church. And so I think, but you know what, that's probably always going to be for some of those kids, because you're dealing with for many of them, they might be unconverted.
yeah,
So their flesh is going to be resistant to the things of God.
yeah,
And so for those kids, it's not as if we're overlooking them, but we're just realizing that we're ministering not to regenerate people. For some of them they're just unregenerate teens at this point. We still love them, we still serve them, but we don't expect them to respond and act like Christians when they're not Christians yet. We got to keep
yeah.
preaching the gospel to them and calling them to repent and believe. And so I think that that's definitely where, you don't know, no matter how many kids really love getting into the Word, learning the things of God, you're always going to have kids in the youth group who just is the boringest thing,
Sure,
and I don't want to
sure.
go back, Mom.
And,
So I think
and
that's
yeah,
where the youth pastor has to have the convictions. You know what? I know I'm going to get the complaints, but I know that in the long run, this is the healthier thing to do.
man, and I think that's that. And I know ministry is hard, just in general. I think this is where, for whatever reason, I think this is why youth ministry is doubly hard, right? Because I mean, you're dealing with this in between space of going, hey, it is relationship building. Like, you have to build relationships, or else there is no way to disciple to an extent. But then you
Yeah.
can't. But then you can't kind of, pigeonhole these doctrines, which you said it's massive. It's not just the doctrine of Christ, but doctrine of salvation, the doctrine of ecclesiology, all of that type of stuff really does play into how you plan a program and stuff like that. So like I think the reason why I wanted you on is because, or we wanted you on is because, we're a bunch of youth pastors talking, and a lot of times we go to our parents a lot of times and say, hey, this is why we do what we do, right? We realize, there is a difference between the regenerate and unregenerate, because just spiritually, one's blinded, one's not blinded.
Yeah.
But we get so much pushback from parents that we're just like, man, or hey, you're just the youth guy, you don't really know what you're talking about. You're supposed to take care of my kid or whatever else like that. But to hear it from you and where you sit, I mean, that's also very, very huge. But then also realize, man, a lot of churches don't have someone like you telling these parents or the congregants that this is the spiritual reality there, and so we have a little bit more time, but like, what are some encouragements for youth pastors now that have to deal with kind of these things where, they want to be faithful to their calling, and they also want to be biblically sound, but they're also dealing with, parents and church governments, and they feel sometimes they're way outside their comfortability and stuff like that. What are your advice on that, to a struggling youth pastor, young youth pastor, these type of things?
Yeah. I think probably one of the most helpful things is just to help temper the expectations of what God expects of them, and that's the primary person that they're serving. We are serving the youth, we're serving the parents, serving the family, serving the church, but ultimately, of course, it's God. And just knowing that we are doing what God is calling us to do, and we're being as faithful as we can to that, then I think those youth pastors or youth leaders can be able to really rest their head and have a good night's rest. And so that really comes down to understanding, what is youth ministry intended for? And I think, it comes down to just understanding that for both children and youth ministry, we have to understand that we can't control the timing of the salvation of these kids. So we have no idea when the Spirit's going to blow, like John 3, when he's going to bring new life, he's going to bring the new birth. And so for much of both children and youth ministry, it's really about understanding that we're laying out the groundwork, laying out the foundation, or just maybe using an analogy that Jesus would often use. We're preparing the soil, right? And so knowing that we can't bring the growth Like we can't create the spiritual life, but we can prepare the soil. We can plant the seeds like any good, faithful farmer, right? So I think that's where youth pastors, youth workers really need to see themselves as, we're doing farming work where we have a responsibility, prepare the soil, prepare them so that it could be in their teen years, because children ministry, a lot of that is laying out the groundwork,
That's
preparing
right.
the soil,
Preparation.
and then sometimes for some of those youth, it is going to be those teen years, because that's when they begin to start asking those existential questions, right? Like, who am I? What is the meaning of life? What happens after death? Those are the big questions that I remember I started asking when I was in middle school. Never even crossed my mind before that. I never feared death
That's right.
until around those preteen, teen years, and that's when I started thinking about the more existential questions of life. And so it could be for some teens, that is the time where you're going to start seeing spiritual fruit, that the Spirit blows, the Spirit comes and brings new life. And so all of that prep work, you start seeing the fruit of it. And praise God that you do have youth in your youth groups where you can see evidence of regeneration, and they're seeking baptism and they're becoming church members, right? And that's awesome. Praise God. But the reality is there's still going to be a number of youth where for the entirety of your time ministering to them, you're going to be just watering and weeding.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're not going to see much fruit and much growth. And if you expected all of that fruit and growth to happen under your watch, then yeah, you're just setting yourself up for a lot of disillusionment, disappointment. But if you see your job as, I'm just contributing to the larger process of what the church as a whole is doing, and my particular role here in the work of the church in equipping the saints is that I am trying to prepare the soil, plant the seed, water, weed. Sometimes I'm gonna see some buds growing up, and I'm gonna be able to tend to those. And I'm so thankful for those. But for the rest, it's still worth it. It's still important ministry you're doing, even though the kid graduates and never really showed signs of spiritual life, because the work is still being accomplished of preparing, of planting, watering, weeding, and Lord willing, college years, post-college, God in his sovereignty will bring the growth, bring the spiritual life. And a lot, I don't know if it's for yourself, but like I was sharing earlier, for myself and for many others, if you ask people, adults now, their testimony, especially ones that grew up in church, I think college, post high school often is either the conversion point or the point where a significant growth experience where it really set a new orientation and course in life. And so I think youth pastors just have to be content with the role that God has called them to, knowing that the growth might come after the kid is out of their youth ministry.
That's right.
But having the kingdom mindset of knowing, it's not about me being able to have all these crops to be able to like show, hey, look how fruitful my ministry is.
That's right.
It's about being faithful, knowing that, hey, look, I did what I could, and I was as faithful as I can by the grace of God. And some youth pastor is going to be able to experience the harvest. And praise God for him. I'm going to pray for that youth pastor to be faithful. I'm sorry, the college pastor. Some college pastor is going to reap the harvest and experience the fruit. But that youth pastor should be happy that as long as the Lord will and the fruit comes at some point.
That they did the best soiling and the best weeding that
watering
they could.
And weeding they could. So I think that's kind of what I would try to encourage youth pastors, just to have a more realistic and wider perspective and expectation of what they're trying to accomplish in their ministry.
Hey, well, I appreciate it, man. It's been a really fast hour for me. Wish we could talk more, but
no, I love this, man.
Well, I mean, we definitely got to have you on some other time. But hey, we not only appreciate this time here on this podcast, but also setting for a lot of us, setting an example of coming back to an Asian American church. Serving the local churches, preaching the gospel very clearly. walking with your people for many years. I think that to us, you're we call you a legend. You're not that old,
Yeah.
but again,
Yeah,
we do appreciate kind of the path that you're laying for us. And so, I mean, for us, hopefully we could talk more about conferences and other things in the future. I think
talk about the Chinese church or the Asian
Absolutely.
American church. I love to have those conversations.
And I think we need to, just because I think now of all times, youth ministries and adult ministries need to work together. We've been so siloed that, and we're talking about the same things now. It's not like, well, it's like youth stuff here and then just adult ministry here. I mean, we're talking about gospel-minded, kingdom-building aspects, but now it's almost going, how do we have these long thinking conversations? And those are going to be key, especially for the growth of and sustainability of the Asian American church.
Definitely.
So, man, I appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Hey, do you mind if I make a quick plug for PACT and for our render retreat? So I think Collab and what you guys are doing really aligns well with PACT. That's a partnership of Asian American churches in Texas that CBC and HCC we're all a part of, and that's really kind of the English pastors and English ministers of churches, Chinese churches in Houston, Dallas, Austin, and San Antonio. If you go to our Facebook page, it's just Partnership of Asian American Churches in Texas. And there's a retreat coming up that right now we're still trying to figure out if it's going to actually happen in person. Might just be going online, but it's called Render.
Yeah.
And Render is scheduled for the MLK weekend in January. And that is a retreat for anyone right now that's listening that is sensing an aspiration, a calling to serve in pastoral ministry. And particularly within an Asian American context. If that's something that you are kind of going through the discernment process, wanting to kind of have a mentor, someone that's already doing it, experience, Render is that retreat where you get, it's a smaller retreat because it's really tailored for those considering full-time ministry in the local church. It could be youth ministry, it could be adult ministry, all various kinds. And you get paired up with an experienced, seasoned pastor as kind of a mentor during the time. And so it might still have to be online because of the pandemic situation. We're actually meeting this month to kind of determine some of that. But anyways, if you just kind of follow the Facebook page, then eventually when we start promoting it, you'll be able to be caught up on that. So that's called Render.
And Render was pivotal in our lives, right? I mean, we went through it. We taught through it as well. It was huge for us. So cool. Hey, appreciate that plug, man. Well, definitely.
Justin, thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Really commend you guys for what you guys are doing.
Appreciate it, man. All right, everybody. We'll see you guys next 2 Thursdays from now. All right.